Hey everyone. So in the interests of honesty and transparency, I think it's worth mentioning a couple of things before I play this video. So first of all, you'll notice it's quite a lot longer than all of the others. This is my fault. I kind of let this one get away from me. A little bit of a lesson to me in being more disciplined and staying on track. But anyway, as a consequence of it going on longer than anticipated, the Zoom cut us off after 40 minutes. So we came back and we carried on, but I forgot to record us when we came back and we carried on. And so we sort of we redid the second part. And if I'm honest, it didn't come out as well the second time around, obviously, because it wasn't as spontaneous and in the moment and so on. And so apologies for all of these things. But unlike last time where I edited it because, you know, a few tweaks here and there sort of kept it as this time I haven't even attempted to do that. I've left it completely alone. It's still a really fun, enjoyable, sometimes puerile, but often quite funny, and even on a couple of occasions, quite insightful conversation. And so I hope you enjoy it in its unexpurgated form. Also, if I'm honest, a little bit of laziness on my part, because it's going to take me a few hours. If I am going to edit it, it's going to take me a few hours to do a decent job of it. So I'm just going to leave it alone and watch it as is. So I hope you enjoy it. And as always, thank you very much for watching. All right, welcome back again. This is actually my second one today. You can tell because I'm wearing the same shirt. My friend Simon is back for another episode of Things That Bug Me. Yeah, Simon last time was talking about what I was talking about, daylight saving in particular, how it relates to him as a driving instructor. Yeah, today he's got a slightly different moan. Well, in fact, not a slightly different moan, a very different moan about the sort of general state of manners and courtesy in the world today. So, Simon, thank you very much. Welcome back. Good to see you again, old chap. And yeah, off you go. When you're ready, go and have your moan.
Thanks very much, Eric. Yes, moaning is certainly something that's right in my wheelhouse. So, yeah, we've been talking about just general manners and civility, and I kind of want to relate it to sort of driving things because I am a driving instructor, and sort of two particular areas on this of where kind of good manners and civility and just common decency have completely broken down. One would be the thing that singularly most annoys me while driving, and that's people that don't indicate. It is the most annoying thing, especially when you're trying to teach people to drive and you're trying to tell them how to judge a situation around about whether they should go or not. Now, the indicators are positioned in every single car that's made right by your hand. They could not be positioned with any more convenience, right? I understand if they were in the boot, people would be, I can't be bothered to stop the car, get out the car, get into the boot and signal. That's perfectly understandable, but they are by your hand. So as you're driving, you're making certain, although we drive a lot on autopilot, I'd say a lot of people drive, you're still making decisions and things in your mind. You're still coming up to a roundabout or a junction, you know, whether you're turning left or right. So those decisions are still being made in your mind. So it's not like it's an unconscious thing, but it is a thing that you're just not flicking that little rod up or down, right? And it just makes that other people don't know what you're doing, right? And they don't know what they're doing, so they're stopped. It's holding other people up. It can obviously also be really dangerous as well because you then go to turn right and the other person that's moving on your left is going. It becomes a really dangerous situation. It becomes really on a daily basis. It's the single most annoying thing about driving. And there are so many annoying things about driving in London that you could go on that. But that is the big one. And it's just not explainable why people won't do it. And I'm going to go on that nearly 50% of people just don't bother to do it. They just don't. Really? They're just going to go, I'm going to come up to this, screw everybody else. I'm going whichever direction I want to go in. I'm not going to tell you which direction I'm going in so it would make your life easier and safer. I'm just going to go, and I'm just not going to indicate.
You should come and hang out in Spain, because one of the very first things I noticed about driving when I first came to Spain, one of the first things I noticed about driving here was how poor the indication was, right? And so coming from the UK, I felt like I was spoiled. Like I feel like most people indicate most of the time, was my impression. You drive a lot more than I do, and you obviously have a slightly different sense. But my impression of the UK was that, yeah, like some people don't, but most people indicate most of the time. Whereas here, no one indicates at all, ever. In fact, they are taught when they learn to drive, they are taught not to indicate which direction they're going to be taking off a roundabout. All they do is indicate right when they're leaving the roundabout, but as they approach the roundabout, they are taught not to indicate which exit they might be taking off of the rest. So if you're turning left at a roundabout, you don't. Do you know what I mean? Like there's no.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
So
way
I've noticed.
worse here, the indication thing. I'm just that's my point anyway. In a lot.
So I've just come back from Italy, and the roundabout situation is a little bit different in Italy. That they seem to be a little bit more spaced apart, where I could see the indication off, and maybe that the indication on isn't as necessary. But we are full of mini roundabouts, and it's the mini roundabouts that are the particular big problem, right? And especially when you're trying to teach someone to drive, because obviously here, the driving test being so hard, if the student doesn't go when they're supposed to go, they can be failed for undue hesitation, for not going when they should have done, right? But so we're trying to teach them to make their decisions based on what the other drivers are telling them to do. And if everybody just did this, everything would run much smoother, right? Now, we already know how angry and just nasty people get when they get into their cars anyway. They're probably perfectly good people. And it's not just like the old days where it was men being really vicious and nasty. Now, yeah, the women have caught up with that as well. They're quite prepared to give you the finger and all the rest of it. I had someone do that the other day who just, completely turned, left from a right-hand lane and then gave me the finger afterwards. So the women have joined the cause of just being completely arseholes when they get on the road. The indication though one is one that I don't understand, because it's so simple to do, it's so convenient, and it makes everything flow much easier, much quicker, much simpler, much safer, which is obviously the big one, being a driving instructor, right? I think it's just a general kind of thing of how people have gotten when they've gotten in cars, right? I'm going to go to another example now, which is
before you do, can I just ask you a quick question about indication before we move on from that? Can I just? Yeah. I think it was you. I could be wrong because it was a long time ago, but I think it was you that said to me that, like, if I'm approaching a junction and I'm pulling out into a superior road, right? So it's me to give
going minor to major
road, right? And so I'm waiting to turn right in the UK. I'm waiting to turn right, and someone is coming along indicating that they're going to turn left at the road that I'm going to be pulling out of, right? Pretty sure it was you that said to me, I don't pull out and start my maneuver until they've initiated their left turn, right? I don't rely on their indication. I wait until they've initiated their turn before I start to pull out. Is that correct?
It's semi-correct. So you can be in a situation where you're judging what the other driver's going to do. Now, if they've slowed their car down, so let's say you've seen them coming down the road and their indication's been on a long time, you've got a right to think, well, they've just left their indicators on.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not going to trust this. But if they've put it on at a reasonable time and they've slowed the car down to a certain point, and let's say there's not something right up their back. So I would teach, if there was two cars coming down and they were both turning left, and there's nothing on your left and you're turning right, remember, we are dealing the opposite side of the road, go, move, go. You need to get traffic. This is London. You need to get things going. And you can be failed for not going. So what you're saying is 50% right. You shouldn't solely rely on their indication, because you should see what the car is doing. You can see the position of the car and certainly the speed of the car. If the car hasn't slowed down, I'm saying they're probably not going to turn. They've just left their indicators on, right? But if they're there, so it is the person who is emerging from the minor to the major road. It is their responsibility to make sure it's safe before they go. But obviously, if someone's indicating, right, and you've got two people, and I can think of a particular junction now, which is near a test centre that I use a lot, which is really hard to turn right of. And I really teach that if one car's coming and there's another car up their backside, don't turn, because that car will turn and the other car will move quickly. But if you've got two cars going, you've got to go because that's your opportunity. There's a line of cars behind you and people want to get going. People, the traffic situation's bad. But yes, generally what you're saying is correct. But a roundabout is slightly different. A roundabout is really judging what other people are doing because you're teaching them to come up to the roundabout. In our situation, obviously, you give way to the right in this country, right, at a roundabout. So if you're judging what's going on the right and you're positioning, and let's say you're turning right, and you've got a car coming towards you on your right, and they're turning left, and there's a couple of them turning left, you go. And if you don't go, you can fail your driving test. So you do get students, it drives them mental. It drives me more mental, right? When people just don't bother to indicate. They're at the roundabout. Why not just put it on? I mean, just no reason not to put it on. It makes
so just you say there is no reason. So what do you think the reason is? Is it just they don't think about it, or they do think about it and go, fuck them?
Yeah. It's too much.
I'm not going to give them any help. Fuck them. They can guess.
No, at all. That movement of my fingers is more work than
too much effort. It's too much
effort. It is just it can only be because of the convenience of where the indicator is located. It can only be a selfish gene that's in, and it's just like, fuck them, I'm not going to do it. I mean, I've had many arguments with my wife about it when she hasn't indicated, and I'm like, for God's sake, just indicate and let people know where you're going.
So there's your wife. Okay, so that's your wife. That's someone you can actually have the conversation with, right? Unlike most drivers who are gone in a second, right? You never see them again. But no. Have you asked her, like, why doesn't she indicate? Have you asked her this question? Like, what's
she just forgets, or she's doing something else. She's doing a million other things in the car, which is another thing I'm going to get onto in a moment, because people do not just go in the car to drive from point A to point B. Now it's their office, it's their chatting, they're on these awful on the new, especially electric cars, on these iPad screens, which have proven to be dangerous. There's too much information on these things in too small a thing. So if you want to, for instance, set the demist, you've really got to look at what you're doing and point a button instead of concentrating on the road. Whatever happens to just driving and concentrating on what's in front of you and what's behind you, right? We have made it is. I'm going to get onto the phones in a moment, right? But let's deal with this situation first. It's made us much more selfish and much more, again, I know that we always remember, as slightly older people, we always remember things back in the day, but I don't remember people being quite as angry in cars as they are now, right? And I do know that traffic is worse and potholes are worse and all of those other elements are worse. There's roadworks in this country. They start roadworks. There's no one doing any work on the road, and you've just got these things, and you think
bollards and wheelbarrows.
And also you've dug this road up 4 weeks ago, right? Couldn't you have done whatever you need to do now 4 weeks ago, right? Which I think was something that they were trying to change. But so you've got all of these things that make it a more difficult, a more hostile, a more aggravating, irritable situation. And then you've got people just don't care about anybody else. No other road users. There's not, we teach people to be considerate road users. I mean, that's what driving instructors should do. And as soon as they pass, I've got a feeling that all ends. Do you know what I mean? I hope my students use their indicators when they pass, but who knows? I try to stress to them what the importance is of being civil and just polite to everybody and just keeping everything flowing smoothly. So what is a not pleasant situation at times can be just a bit more tolerable, but this seems like the most ridiculous of things not to do, right? There is no effort whatsoever. It's not returning a phone call, and it's not having to sort of, park a little bit more considerately, and actually move your car. It's you're there and it's right by your hands. I mean, they have put it there for a purpose. We even have self-cancelling indicators now, which was actually a British invention from the 1960s, I believe. So they even go off for you. So most of the time, you don't actually have to turn them off yourself. They'll do it for you, right? But when you're driving along and you just have this attitude of, I just don't care about anybody else. So I'm just going to do what I've got to do, get to where I want to do, and let everybody else,
So I wonder whether it's actually as conscious and intentional as that, like fuck everyone else. Whether that's actually,
no.
or whether it's just don't think of it, right? Like just so in their little bubble, doing their own thing, just disconnected from the very notion that there are other drivers on the road. Like it's not like an intentionally selfish act. It's actually in a way more selfish than an intentionally selfish act because you fail to acknowledge that there is even anyone out there that you have a responsibility to.
I would say you were probably right with your second one. I don't think people necessarily go, right, fuck it, I'm coming up to a roundabout, I'm just going to screw everybody else over by not indicating. I just think it's that kind of selfish gene that is really and in with driving particularly, do you know what I mean? I live in a road.
It's beyond selfish. It's kind of oblivious, right? It's beyond selfish.
Oblivious.
Yeah, oblivious. Yeah.
It's oblivious. It's people that park over our driveway, right? That someone did that the other day. There's a podiatrist opposite us, and so it's quite busy out here during the day. And someone actually, I mean, you get people that semi-park over our drive, and you can say, all right, they're just bad drivers. And then I had somebody the other day that just halfway parked over our drive, and when I confronted them about it, and I was quite nice about it, I just said, I need to get in and out of here. She goes, oh, I'm only going to be 10 minutes. And I'm like, but that's not the point, yeah? We own this house. We have a driveway. We need to get in and out. It's that mentality, yeah, that just comes, and I kind of feel that it just slips into every part of our lives, and certainly of our driving lives. I thought that when they changed the rules here, I mean, obviously we had the mobile phone thing, so people got mobile phones, and now everybody has to be on their phones at all times, all parts of the day. If you put your phone down, you're just not part of society, right? So we now I have to teach, which is something different I've had to teach in the last couple of years, to watch for pedestrians who are going to cross a road who don't even look up now. They just look at their phones. They can be watching a movie, they can be doing what. They don't even stop and look left or right. Do you remember the Green Cross man that we had when we were growing up? The Green Cross man would have a heart attack if he saw what goes on most of the time. And you just think, you're crossing a road here, right? It's
with
your safety
on, right? So you're not using your ears or your eyes to check anything.
No sensory things whatsoever. Just smell, I guess. I can smell the danger in the air.
Maybe they're Jedi. Maybe they're like using the Force, right? And they don't need.
This is a possibility, Eric, right? But I'm looking at some of these people, and I'm thinking they don't look like Jedi stock to me. They look like they'd be dead Jedi, right? They look like they'd be the stormtroopers that just get, the anonymous stormtroopers that gets killed in the white outfits. More than that, now people are, when they're driving, right? So we've changed the law here. So we start with mobile phones, and everyone was driving holding their phones, and they did all kinds of safety things. And it turns out that driving holding your phone is as dangerous as drunk driving. Yeah, they're very, very similar, because your levels of concentration, you've only got one hand on the wheel, whatever else. I'm not massively in favor of people using their phones even on hands-free in cars, but that's legal. So you would have thought, so they brought in a fine and 3 points, and that wasn't enough. So now they have 6 points and about a £200 fine. And I honestly believe that they could bring in the death penalty for people that hold their phones, and people would still hold their phones and drive in their cars, even though every technology, most new cars, obviously you connect hands-free, but even if you have an older car, you can just get the Bluetooth earpiece. You have your phone down, and you can talk and hear and whatever's going on. You don't actually physically have to touch your phone. But I would say that I drive around and I see at least 4 or 5 people a day just with their hands by their ears holding their telephones, right? Kids in the car often, right? I mean, I've seen people, I had a woman not so long ago holding her phone, kids in the car, no seatbelts, going the wrong way round the roundabout to overtake us, right? And you just think, now, as a parent, right, your main responsibility is to make sure your kids are safe, right? And that you'd really want to make sure that they do live for the car journey that you're going to make. And also, you don't want to smash your car up either. Well, this woman was doing every possible thing. And you just think all of it was unnecessary. The kids obviously should have been wearing their seatbelts. That's the law, front and back, right? You're not allowed to hold your phone. That's the law. And you're certainly not allowed to go the wrong way round the roundabout because you're in a hurry. Yeah. And And that's the other thing. If people say, when I've spoken to people, I say, oh, well, look, I'm always in a hurry. And I'm like, leave 5 minutes earlier. It's not that hard, really. Yeah. I try and very much take the stress out of driving because it's an extremely stressful thing that I do as a job. And it's so if I've got to be somewhere, I just leave a few minutes earlier. I try and relax. I'll maybe have a podcast on, but I try not to use the phone too much during the day if someone calls me, but obviously it would always be on hands free. But that whole thing now, I just see people constantly, and I'm just thinking, who needs to speak to people that much? I don't do a lot of telephone conversation. I send texts and stuff like that. And obviously, if I'm going to send a text or a message and I need to do that, I pull over, I turn the engine off, which you have to do, and I send my message, and then I carry on my way, right? You sit at a traffic light, you can always tell, you sit at a traffic light behind a car, and the lights have changed green, and you just watch their head, and it's down like that. And you know they're on the phone.
Yeah.
You know they're on the phone.
Seen
right?
that.
And you're behind them, and you're going, I can't imagine what job. I suppose if you're like an emergency heart surgeon, you need to be in that much contact. But I can't see what jobs that you have or what things in your life that you need to be on that instant of contact with the whole rest of the world.
It's not just driving. As you say, it's like walking down the street, bumping into people, walking into lampposts. I mean, I've all of these things. I've seen all of these things.
Well, people just stopping in the street for absolutely no reason whatsoever. I mean, that's one of the most annoying things in the world. And it's always phone related.
Yeah. I mean, I have on occasion been guilty of it myself, walking down the street, paying attention to my phone and bumping into people. I mean, not very often. I'm not nearly as badly glued to my phone as many are, but I've been guilty of it myself and been so ashamed that I've been so disconnected from the from what's going on.
But that's the worst one. You're walking behind someone and just stop. And you're thinking, you haven't stopped because you've seen, a famous building. You're outside the Empire State Building or something like that. You think, well, you've got to look up at it, or out, by the Trevi Fountain or something like that. You're just in sort of, Hendon High Street, and you've just stopped. And we've become so insular and so selfish with our lives, and I think that the phones have made that without question worse. Right. I think that the way obviously that we drive has made that worse as well, where if everybody just collectively went, okay, I'm going to relax, I'm going to follow what we've got 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in this all over London now, and it's just a nightmare, and it's horrible. Driving in London is just a really, truly horrible experience. But you could make it just a little better by just being a little bit civil. For instance, if someone wants to come in front of me, I'm going to let them in. Do you know what I mean? What difference does it make? I might not. I was going to
ask you this before. I'm glad you've introduced this point, because I was going to ask you this before. So, in your experience, when, and I know it's not always that clear, but when the correct thing to do is to stop and let someone go, in terms of flow, right? Like you said before, flow is the thing, and I totally agree with that. So when the correct thing to do for flow is to stop and let someone go, in your experience, what proportion of the time do drivers in the UK actually do that?
I think they're reasonably good.
Yeah, that's been my experience too.
I think that.
And what about the acknowledgement also, like the thank you and the you're welcome, like
70-80%. A bus driver, if you pull up and so there's a rule in this country, and they do change. And one of the problems, of course, is they issue new versions of the highway code all the time. So, for instance, when you and I learned to drive, since then there's probably been 20, 25 new additions in the highway code. Right, it is in the highway code now that if a bus is signalling right, you need to stop and let them go. That's in the highway code, right? You'll always get a bus driver putting on his hazard lights, flashing you. So I'll always let the bus driver go. I'd say people are generally good, but sometimes they're fighting for that space, so they're edging forward to that space, not to let someone in. I'm not saying you're going to let 5 cars in, but let 1 car in. And there's a road up here where a junction really merges in and people need to get on the main road. They're not as bad with that. I'd say most people are generally pretty good with that. But as I said, when you get to other countries, when I drove in Italy, that's not so much the case. It is very much, I'm on the road, I own the road, I am more important than everybody else. And it is very much a flow thing. It's very much because we're in a capital that's very traffic heavy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
If everybody just allows other people to do what they've got to do, it would just be so much better on the roads, you know. And also people would just remain calmer, right? Which is also, I mean, the amount I've seen on a regular basis, people getting out of their cars. If there's not, they're either arguing, it's quite funny because people get out of their cars and they're all angry until they get to the point where it actually comes to it. And then they're going, well, what do I do now? Right? I've shouted at this person, they've got out of their car. Are they actually going to have a fist fight, right? About whatever it is, someone cutting in front of somebody else or whatever else. But the amount of times that you see this and the genuine anger, and that can't be good for their health. It's not good for society. It's just not good, the amount of anger that people have. And if just people were more civil to each other and just more you had a greater acknowledgement that there's other people on the road as well, right?
So there's two things. There's two things here. We've sort of touched on this already, but I think it's actually important to separate them. So I think there's a sort of obliviousness, right? Like it just doesn't cross their mind. It just doesn't cross people's mind. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with Jochen, right? Where he was talking about dog poo on the street of New York. And again, there was these two things. There's laws against it. And, you know, there's penalties for not cleaning up your dog's poop, but then there's a lack of enforcement of those penalties. But then there's also the broader issue of, well, why would you leave your dog's poop out in a public space where, you know, there's other people, right? Would you want dog poop left on your front walk, kind of, you know, on your own front stoop kind of thing, right? So there's two parts of it here, right? There's one which is the actual caring and, you know, willingness to be courteous, which, you know, from this thing of letting people through and thanking them and acknowledging, I think most people are actually willing to do that. But then there's this not even realizing that there is other people around in that moment, that obliviousness, right? Like not indicating at roundabouts just because not out of a deliberate, I'm not going to indicate, just it doesn't occur to me to do so, right? Like I'm not even aware enough of my surroundings that it occurs to me to do so. And so
but they do know that the car includes indicators. It's not an optional extra that you have to pay for, right? All cars come standard with indicators and they're all positioned in exactly the same place. But I do agree with you that I don't think that necessarily people are making the conscious thing. It's just the natural selfishness, because everybody had to learn to drive and everyone's had to pass a driving test. Everybody in this country, even if you're from abroad, you can only drive on an international license for a year. You still have to pass a British driving test. So you do know what the rules and regulations are, right? And you will have been in that situation where you would have been at a mini roundabout and somebody hasn't indicated and you've gone, oh, bloody idiot, not indicating. It's just, you know what I mean? I could have, you know, but for my situation, obviously trying to teach kids safety and trying to teach them good driving practices from the very start, so that they become more responsible, more polite drivers, is made really difficult when so many people, and I mean, I had a driving lesson this morning and talked to my student about it this morning as we're sitting at a roundabout and someone did that to her, where she could have gone, right, and the person's just not indicated, and you're just thinking, but why wouldn't you do that? Why would you not? You were taught to do that. It's not something you don't know that you're supposed to do. And of course, there is no law. Or going back to the dog poo situation is exactly the same in London as it is in New York. It's not any better there. Again, the same thing. Why would you not just pick it up, right? Why would you not indicate? It just makes other people's lives around you better, right? And once we start living, and I know it's only a small thing, and I know obviously I'm coming from a driving instructor's point of view, but it's just these small things in civility and society that becomes the bigger things.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't think it's a small thing. I think these are symptoms of a much, much, much bigger thing. Just this complete absence of a sense of being connected to and responsible to and for each other. You know, the
in a community, which is what we are. We are a community here. Most of the people that I'm driving around, you know, there'll be people from other places, but there are lots of people that are just part of the community. And if we were all just a little nicer and a little kinder to each other and a little bit more courteous, I think our lives that are really, really hard at the moment. I mean, things in this country are really, really, really hard, right? Would just be a little better. Maybe you would get home and you'd be a little nicer to your family because you wouldn't be coming home as tense and as angry, right? And the same in stepping in the dog shit, you know, in the street. You know, I mean, that's just aggravating as well. And all of these things, if we were just a little, just took that little extra, not even going out of the way. I'm not talking about even going and checking up on your neighbours, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Which is another thing that I find. Sometimes you read in the paper and you go, oh, they found this person, they've been dead in their flat for 2 weeks. And you're thinking, what, nobody's checked up on them? You know, it's we've got an elderly lady next door and I make sure I knock on her door and see if she needs anything doing and if there's anything, and I move her bins in and out for her and stuff like that. It just makes us all it makes for a better society. Yeah, I hope somebody else will do that when I get older.
Aldous Huxley on his deathbed, I think it was on his deathbed, or certainly very near the end of his life anyway, said something along the lines of, I know it sounds pathetic, but after a lifetime of work, the only real piece of advice I have to offer mankind is just try to be a little kinder with each other.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it. Just be a little bit more civil, right? As I said, it would be nice if we all did more charity work and we all did more things. But I understand that people have, but there are little things that you could do in your life where you could do that.
Even if you can't make things better, you can at least not make them worse, right?
Worse, there you go. When you're walking on the street, right? I think there's some towns in America that have actually banned people. I'd need to check this out, banned people from talking on their phones while being in the streets, right? I don't know. Again, we don't have enough policemen in this country, certainly in London, to arrest people for shoplifting, burglary, car theft. So there's no way that the police are coming round.
A little harsh anyway, isn't it? You're not allowed to talk on your phone on the street. Like, I understand why, but nevertheless, that seems a little harsh.
I think crossing roads is where it is. I don't think it's on the streets. I think it's crossing roads. So if there's a policeman there and you get caught and you're walking across the street looking at your phone, then you can be ticketed.
But this raises an interesting question. If you have a policeman, even if you had a policeman at every roundabout, a policeman at every pedestrian crossing, right, like checking that people were indicating that they weren't on their phones, that they were paying attention to what's going on, and fining them, you know, every time they didn't do it. Like, even if you had that, I mean, that might actually force the behaviors to disappear, but that's not really what we want, right? Like, we want people to do it because we want everyone doing it because they understand the benefit to everyone, including themselves, when everybody does this, right? Like, that's really what we're after.
Yeah, preferably not a police state, obviously, right? But as I said, there isn't enough policemen in this country to solve serious crime.
Absolutely.
So all of these things, so these people, certainly the people that are driving holding their phones, for instance, right? They know they shouldn't be doing that. There's no, you know, it's like drunk driving, yeah? You can't get away and go, I didn't know I couldn't have 10 pints and then get in my car, right? There is none of that. It's not the 1970s anymore where people regularly drove drunk. And the way that they changed that is because I do remember in the 70s, you would get things where people would feel like sorry if someone got caught for drunk driving. You're going, oh, you were really unlucky for that. And that really changed in a conscious thing and the way that they really showed it on commercials, where people were like, no, you're an arsehole. If you drove drunk, you put me at risk, you put kids, you put all kinds of people at risk. But that message doesn't seem to have come across in the same way with phones, right? The fact that, as I said, I will still see people.
Not yet. It took time with alcohol. It'll take time with phones as well. Not yet. I think in time it will. People will recognize just how dangerous it is not to have their attention on what they're doing when they're driving, right? There's a lethal weapon they're moving around and they're not paying attention to how they're using it. And
how about making it just illegal to be on your phone? No Bluetooth, just illegal to be on your phone while you're driving, because technically you should be concentrating on what you do. Now, there's a couple of things.
Well, is talking on the phone on a Bluetooth any different to talking to a passenger who's in the car with you? Is that really any different?
I think that the concentration level is different, yes. Well, you're not allowed to eat in the car, right? You can be, so if you're eating an apple, you can be stopped by the police and fined for eating an apple, right? You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to change the volume on the radio by taking your hands off the wheel. You're supposed to do it on the wheel right now, right? So
About looking at the
talking.
sat nav, though, I mean, that's unbelievably distracting and those screens you mentioned before, right? Like the function screens with all these buttons everywhere. Like these are unbelievably distracting,
Hugely.
right?
I
Yeah.
mean, I read in a thing that yeah, the Teslas particularly. So people are going to move away from. As I said, my wife has an electric car with one of these screens on there, and every time she has to do something, she has to look and take her eyes off the road, and you just think, well, they manufactured this thing. Did they not think about that in the first place? Yes, it's all looks very good, and it looks very, the way that he wanted Teslas to look, that kind of very basic, stark kind of look, and just have everything controlled on one screen. But I think we're moving away from that now. I like knobs and buttons to press, and I like them to be clear and big and stuff like that. So it's easy for people to do that. But it does seem to me, I understand what you're saying about passengers there, but I can talk to a passenger and certainly to a student, I think easier with less concentration than I can with a Bluetooth in that sort of conversation, because I'm normally talking about that. But I do get what you mean. I'm not saying that people should be absolutely silent in their cars, or that they shouldn't necessarily have music, but
I mean, I
I'm
think the
not
thing needs
sure
to be
that.
anything that takes your eyes off the road. I think that's the that takes your eyes off the road and and your mirrors for for anything more than a fraction of a second. That's
Well, it's also concentration as well.
no, for
It would be
sure, for sure.
concentration,
But I think
you know.
most people
But
can talk and still maintain their concentration on it, whether it's to a passenger or to a voice in their ear or in the speakers. I mean, I think I don't know. I mean, I kind of get your point. I think it is slightly different talking on a phone than talking to a passenger. There's something about them actually being in the car with you, which is not disconnecting you from your environment in the same way that a disembodied voice
because
would.
also they're seeing the same environment. So
Yeah,
they're seeing when
yeah.
you're coming up to a roundabout or you're dealing with a situation that's difficult. So maybe they then taper their
Stop talking
conversation
for a
down.
minute. Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
exactly. Where
yeah.
the person on the phone has no idea where you are,
Absolutely.
right? And
Yeah.
they're talking and they're talking about things. I mean, I try and limit my talking on the phone while I'm driving greatly. It's rare that I'll do that. And again, I have to press, even if somebody calls me, I still on my steering wheel have to press a thing to accept it, and still have to press a thing to terminate it. And then people are driving along and they're scrolling for numbers that they've got to call people, and it's I don't know, it just, we have become so totally and utterly dependent on our phones that it's gone beyond, because obviously we grew up in a world, and not everybody that's going to be watching this is going to be our age. We grew up in a world where there was only your home phone, and if you needed to phone someone when you were out, you went to a telephone box. And somehow we all managed to have social arrangements and get places and do things and have a life without constantly talking. I sometimes I drive along and I sometimes wonder on these people, and I'm thinking, who are they talking to? Right? Who are they talking to? And how is it that necessary to talk? I'm not a great one for love. I'm not a great lover of talking on the phone, full stop. I much prefer to talk to somebody in person than I would on the phone. And maybe that's an age thing, I don't know. But yeah, I don't find the need. Sometimes I can go probably a week and I've made one phone call.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're showing both our age and our just general antisocial tendencies here.
Right, that might be true as well. Yeah, well, the fact we don't like people.
So yeah, the question comes up about the possible relationship between this increasing obsession with screens and mobile phones and this increasing level of obliviousness, insularness, selfishness, whatever you want to call it. Do you think there is a connection between these two things?
Yes, without question. Without question, it's people just, as you said before, it's not selfishness. That's the wrong word. It's it's being very isolated and just being focused on the one thing and on themselves, on what they are doing, and that screen in front of them. And so I think that leads to a general kind of thing of where people think about this in all kinds of things that they do. I think if you're living that kind of, I think you mentioned before, about people, you go to a cafe or you go to a restaurant and you see two people, and they're out for dinner or tea or whatever they're doing, and they're sitting they're looking at their phones.
Yeah.
And I think that leads into a larger, a larger situation of people just being very insular in their lives and just being focused on these things that they can't get away from. And maybe it makes us more selfish. I don't know if selfish is the right word, but just more focused on what they're just doing.
And it's right in front of you as well. There's just something that's occurring to me about the distance as well, right? Like you're focused on something that's right here, and anything that's beyond that is outside of your sphere of attention, right? We take away the screen, and all of a sudden, do you understand what I mean? Like it's the whole world gets blocked out by this thing, even though it's only one little tiny screen. But because all of your attention is just on this thing right in front of you, all the trees, the sky, the wind, the birds, the passing cars, right? Whatever it might be, all of that is disconnected from you. It must be so toxic in the long term.
Yes, I think it's toxic for society. I think it's toxic for individuals and toxic for society. And it does have to do with that. I think it makes us, if, as I said, if the word selfish is the wrong word, it just makes us more isolated and more focused on ourselves and what we're doing, right? And it's a larger problem of how we change that. And I think how we change that, certainly from a driving point of view, would be to look to change people's habits and the way that they do things, right? We learn a certain way and then we forget that way, right?
Yeah.
So people being kinder to each other, people letting people in without getting angry so the traffic flows, people indicating, people not being necessarily making phone calls that they don't need to make because they need to pass, I don't know, they need to pass the time in some way. And it seems to be, just being more aware of their surroundings and other people that are on the roads, and whether that's crossing the road or being in the car. And we need to find a way to get people to do that. If it's not voluntarily, it's certainly I'm not in favour of sort of fining people and having more regulations.
Well, this is the general way these things are accomplished, right? As you impose penalties and you try and enforce those penalties, and bit by bit. This is what happened with alcohol, right? Is that the penalties for drunk driving were ramped way up, right, to the point where it was imprisonment, loss of license, all a loss of livelihood as a consequence. All of this, so the penalties were ramped way up. There was a big advertising campaign, drunk driving is murder and irresponsible and blah. And bit by bit, public perceptions changed around drunk driving. Instead of being, as you said earlier on, right, oh, unlucky mate for getting caught drunk driving. Now it's you're a dick for driving drunk, right? That's the feeling. Social attitude, and I think there is a way to do that with, for example, things like phones, indication, the things we've been talking about today. But traditionally, we've done it with negative reinforcement, right? Like punishment when you do it wrong. And I wonder if there is an opportunity to, instead of that, especially with technology as it exists now, is to incentivize and reward doing it right. So every time you do indicate at a roundabout, you score a point. Every time you let someone go at a junction, you score a point. This kind of thing. And then as you accumulate points, you can get rewards of some kind. This would be a much more. And then people are actually encouraged to become better drivers, better pedestrians, better citizens, right? Because there are actually rewards available for doing this.
Yeah, I mean, we have in cars now, we have the black box technology, which you get linked to your insurance, right? Which will look at things like speeding, but it will also look at how fast you go around corners, and it will look at various other aspects of your driving. It's certainly, I would have thought the technology would be there to encompass indicating. I'm not sure it would be there to necessarily allow it whether you let somebody in. But I think that that's a general thing. Yeah, I like the idea of rewarding rather than penalizing people. So if people were going to get, for instance, a discount on their insurance because they were considerate drivers, because not only did they keep to the speed limit, but they used their indicators correctly. And with the
They
technology,
don't sit in the middle lane or the fast lane on the motorway when the inside
absolutely
lane. Yeah.
I mean, you have things on cars now. I'm renting a car now, which will tell you the change of speed on the road instantly. It'll come up if you're in a 20, or say 20, and as soon as you hit the 30, it'll change to 30. Right. So it is done with, but it's done with an idea of newer drivers, and it's done with very much with a speed limit. But it does also do with cornering, how fast you go around corners and stuff like that. But I like the idea of incentivizing people to do that rather than punishing them for not doing that, right? And I think that would have. I think that if you've got people, if that becomes part of your psyche, that when you get in the car that you're going to do that, I think that becomes then a general thing. So it does become a thing of maybe letting people in, because that's your mindset. Whereas your mindset at the moment is, it's almost like a war out there.
Yeah,
right.
That's you're right. Almost the other drivers are the enemy, right? We're not sharing the roads. They're fucking my enemies. Yeah.
It's like Game of Thrones, basically, Battle of the Bastards out there for most drivers.
You win or you die.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be. It just, things will work much simpler and much better if people were just more courteous to each other. And we do have rules. We have rules now that, as I said, that the highway code has changed. You're supposed to let buses out if they're indicating. I still see people going around buses, and you just think, it's a bus, right? Why not just let it out? How is it gonna affect your life? We're talking about fractions of seconds. We're not talking about 20, 25 minutes. And again, if people just got it into their minds, where if they had to be somewhere for, I don't know, let's say 9 o'clock in the morning, and it takes them on a good day 15 minutes. Well, don't just leave 15 minutes, maybe leave 20 minutes or 25 minutes, and just be
half
more
an hour
relaxed.
And get a coffee when you get there if you're 10 minutes early. Yeah.
Just be more relaxed when you're doing that, right? And I think if we can incentivize people to do that, I think it will affect every aspect of their driving, right? As I say, certain things will be harder to monitor than others, but certain things are not that difficult, because, as I say, the technology now, and again, I'm not talking about more cameras. God forbid more cameras.
Not just driving, is it? Sorry to interrupt you, but it's not just driving, is it? Like, if this incentive structure works and it gets people actually thinking about how to be more courteous on the roads, that's not going to stop at the roads. It's going to spill out into all other aspects of life. They're just going to be thinking about how to be more courteous. I mean, it's actually remarkably. Do you know those? When you come into the 30 zone, you've got those things that flashes at you what your speed is. Yeah, like 42, 37, it flashes your speed out. And then when you get down to 30, it gives you a little smiley face and says, thank you, right? Like, that's not a tangible reward that you can spend in any way, right? It's not money off your car insurance, for example, but it's enough to get almost everyone to slow down to 30 and not feel like they've been, like hammered into doing it. Like, thank you for being considerate is the message. As opposed to you're a dick for going.
It's not the 20 mile an hour speed limit.
20's different.
Absolutely
20's,
well, for absolutely no reason whatsoever. They don't do any positive. They
no.
For every reason that they've been done environmentally, they're worse. You've got cars idling at lower speeds, people driving in lower gears,
getting angrier.
And if it's electric, and it's supposed to be an environmental thing, it wasn't supposed to be anything else. It wasn't really a road safety. It was also a traffic calming measure. It doesn't calm traffic. Nothing is going to calm people.
Aggravates
where
people.
You're on. I don't know if people are watching this are familiar with the Finchley Road. The Finchley Road is a main road that leads from central London to North London. It's now right up until you get to that 20 miles all along. It's 3 lanes. Right, and it's 20 miles an hour, and people are struggling to keep it.
20 miles an hour all day and all night, like 24 hours,
all the way up to the top, to where you come into that bit where it's the beginning Golders Green. Yeah, it changes.
Wow,
right up where the garage used to be, where they're building.
So at 2 in the morning, you've got to do 20 all the way up the Finchley Road on a 3-lane road. That's just nuts.
Yeah,
that's just nuts.
Yeah. And that can't be an environmental thing at that time, right? It is.
I assume there's speed cameras regularly along there as well, yeah?
Regular. And not just the speed cameras, of course, because you can know where the speed cameras are. You've then got the speed cameras, and then you've got possible policemen with, you know, with and cars and whatever. And so there are people being done. I believe my wife got done on that particular stretch of road at 23 and had to, you know, got fined and points, but she went to the course and whatever. But it's just, it's counterproductive. And what it does is it makes people angrier, right? And I think when they are angry,
and more inclined to break rules elsewhere because fuck you, right?
Right, not just rules, but kindness things. It makes them less likely to let people in, right? It makes them less likely to indicate. It makes them less likely to be. And you think that people are then they're driving to work with that frustration. They're getting in with that frustration. That's got to be taken at work. Yeah. They're getting home and they're then with their families, with their kids, with their partners, or whatever it is. And that frustration is definitely coming out on there. So it just makes people angrier and less, you know, less of a community kind of thing. It's just going to anything that really sort of that's not necessary, right? It was necessary to reduce speeds from 40 to 30. They have actual statistics that says that people are, I think it's something like 80 or 90% more likely to
be killed or seriously injured.
No, at 40 than they are at 30, right? So you've got that and you go, well, that's fair enough. Do you know what I mean? I can understand there why that wouldn't be a 40, that would be a 30. But the 20 is not been, as far as I understand, was not introduced for that. It was very much introduced for traffic calming and for environmental things. Neither of these things does it worse.
No,
it makes the traffic worse.
Both of them, the opposite,
both of them worse. Absolutely. So then you've got to look at it that it's just purely a revenue making thing, right? Where the councils are making money.
Anyone
from
doing 23 pays 100 quid. Yeah, there's got to be a lot of those 100 quids rolling in.
A lot of them. And a lot of points, and then there's more money on the insurance, and there's everything else. And it just makes people less civil, right? And we should be encouraging civility, right? But that's what I would, if there was anything from this, I would say, let's encourage people to indicate. Let's not have the police pulling them over and fining them and all the rest of it, but let's think of ways that we can, you know, incentivize people to reward people for more community.
I like the black box thing. I obviously heard, I'm sure everyone's heard of the idea of black boxes in planes, right? The record everything that goes on in it. And so the same thing, it records everything about the journey. And even if it can't record things like stopping to let people in, but certainly indications, speeding, cornering speeds, all of these kinds of. The one thing that concerns me, it's just occurred to me, one thing that concerns me is smacks a little bit of like social credit system, right? Like, do what we want you to do and we'll reward you,
Big
kind
brother.
of thing. It does smack a little bit of that.
But only in the way that it's dealt with now, because now it is taking, so you get your insurance at a slight discount, and every time you break those rules, it goes up, you pay a penalty for doing that. I like it the other way round, where your insurance is what it is. But if you are a courteous driver and it's recording that, it's offering you discounts to be that. So it's a reward for being that, but it's not a penalization if you're not, right? So I think that that's a different mindset of bringing that together, right? Rewarding people for being better drivers,
courteous, thoughtful, kind, considerate. Yeah.
But not, you know, the speed limit one is a different thing, but it, you know, it's not going to stop people crossing the you know, using their phones, but that could be connected to your phones. Your phones are connected to your car. Perhaps the less that you use your phone during your car during the thing, again, a reward for that, because there's no question now that the safety things have looked at that. They are saying that any use of your phone is bad, right? So they're saying that, you know, if they're saying that eating, right, and there are cases where people have been, there was a case not so long ago where a woman was pulled over for eating an apple by the police, right? And they're saying that took one hand off her wheel and concentration of what she's doing. Smoking would be another one. And the radio, right? You're not supposed to take your hands off the wheel to adjust the volume.
You're not allowed to smoke while you're driving.
No, you're not supposed to do that either. Right? But, you know, rather than doing it that way, reward people for I mean, not for not smoking. I mean, that should be reward enough in itself, right? But reward people for being courteous and for being, you know, as I said, the indication would be easier than letting people in. I don't know how they would monitor that. There's enough sensors on cars.
No, but whatever. It's not the
already.
technical details are not that important, but the idea of creating a positive incentive structure as opposed to a negative punishment structure is really the key point, isn't it?
Yes, encourage people to be nicer and more civil,
and
then I think that
creates a culture of we're on the same team and we're trying to make everyone's lives easier, rather than we're enemies and trying to avoid punishment for doing. Do you know what I mean? Rather than we're trying to avoid punishment, we're seeking to enjoy the benefits rather than avoid punishment. It's a whole different mindset.
I mean, I think that's the really important thing. That's the way to get people to encourage people to be like to be like that. And as I said, I think that and it's a win-win situation for everybody. It's a win-win situation, right? Because nobody is gaining or nobody is benefiting by being a dick on the roads, right? Do you know what I mean? You're a dick and then someone's a dick back to you, right? You know,
and then they're a dick to the next person they meet because they're still pissed off at you, and so on and so on. And so on. Yeah.
You know, thanking people, right? Again, we can't reward people for that, but I think that puts a whole mindset of how people will respond to each other, with a little bit more courtesy, with a little bit more respect, and not having people. The amount of times, I don't know what it's like there, but the amount of times that I see people arguing, getting out the cars and arguing with each other, and you think, what could possibly have gone on that's so terrible that you're even contemplating fighting this person, right? You know, what did they do? They pulled out in front of you, well, maybe you would slow down and see them and let them in, or maybe they would wait until you pass because it's not a convenient time or a safe time to do it. Just if everybody, I think that the attitude, people's lives, their standard of life would be better done by being kinder to each other.
Possible that this was in the previous part, but Aldous Huxley's one of his last public statements was, you know, if in all of my life, if all I've learned, the only real piece of advice I have to offer is just be a little kinder to each other.
Yes, and I think that is because, as I say, from somebody that's on the road all the time, there are just, and it has changed. As I said, it's changed over the years. I've noticed it. Less people indicating, more people on their phones. It's quite remarkable.
Well, I think the phones is a big thing, as we've already discussed. I think the phones is a big thing as people become more and more dependent on their phones. They become less and less concerned about the social contract, right? About the responsibility to other people that are around them, sharing their space with them, sharing the roads with them, whatever. It just more me, as we've already said a couple.
They're less connected to everybody else.
Exactly.
They're connected to what is the worldwide or whatever they're doing, but they're not connected to they're not connected to everybody else around them. And so I think a general thing, I think just everything in society would be better if we were more connected to each other and less focused on just us.
All right, Simon. So, I mean, this started with indication, phones, 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. I'm going to need to learn to be more disciplined with no. That's not today's moan. That's going to be a moan for another day. We've covered a lot of ground today, but I think we've ended in a nice place. This idea of finding opportunities to reward people for behavior which increases flow, increases kindness, increases courtesy, rather than punishing people when they don't do it, recognizing it and rewarding it when they do it. Not just on the roads, but I mean, this is just one way. This is just one thing that we've honed, but just as a general thing, looking for ways to incentivize kindness and consideration and courtesy.
And I think the government can help and councils can help. As we talked about, is roadworks where there's nobody working on the roads. Let's stop that. Let's get fines in.
And let's acknowledge that it is an inconvenience to everyone, right? And have sincerely worded signs up we sincerely apologize for the inconvenience that we know this is going to cause you. We will do our utmost to complete it as quickly as possible. While this is going on, the best alternative routes are this one or this one or this one, right? Like, actually be helpful, actually indicate that you understand that this is an inconvenience and that you're sorry for it and you're going to make it.
But of course, if you're
lower people's levels
of
resentment, allowing them to perhaps be a little bit kinder to the next person that comes across their path.
But of course, if you're going to have that, you actually do need people working on the roads.
Sure, yeah, it has to be genuine. That's what I mean. It can't be virtue signaling bullshit. It has to be genuine. It has to actually be meant.
Genuine.
Yeah.
Genuine things like that will just help. Obviously, you know, having some sort of transport policy that helps everybody move, right? The car owner has become the enemy now, right? We've taken the cyclist point of view. I mean, you've got to remember, London roads, especially central London roads, weren't built for cars. They weren't built for cycles. They were built for horse and carts, right? So we have very narrow roads, but people still need to use it. So everybody could be. Shouldn't be cyclist, you know, over driver. It should be everybody. Yeah. Everybody. Let's look at ways of making. Certainly, if people want to cycle, that's great. But we also live in a country where the weather is generally shit, right? And there's lots of people in November that don't want to be out going to work on the cycle. So when we're spending huge sums of money on cycle lanes that are not being used, and this is going into
this is another one of my mother's complaints is cyclists and cycle lanes. So
I mean,
I've just been talking about being more disciplined about this. So let's not go down the cycle lane.
Cut me off instantly.
Let's
Eric,
not embark on this one. Not that it's not legitimate. It's just, let's not embark on another one. All right, Simon. I think
if anyone's watching this, if you're driving, use your indicators.
Use your fucking indicators.
Yes, I think that's the message.
All right, Simon. Thank you very much for coming on.
Pleasure, Eric. Speak again.
Talk to you soon. Cheers. Bye.
See you. Bye.